I think as you mature as a business, having defined processes is essential as your team gets bigger and bigger. As a founder, you are kind of the center of the whirlwind, right? You're building all that initial energy, and over time, the whirlwind starts to get bigger and you pull people in and they become part of your energy. And it's like, but you need to let them spin off and start having their own energy. Find great people, enable them, trust them, and give them responsibility.
Now, looking at stages of a company and systems, I've had some actually really hot conversations around this, which surprised me. There seem to be a lot of different philosophies on how much you build a process for doing things versus let people do things their own way. And the framework that I really like and resonated came from Crystal Desnoyer, who's a friend and been a guest on the podcast. And she talked about 3 stages to help think about structure. And one was that growth hacking phase, which is testing, learning, iterating, just throwing stuff at a wall and trying to get forward momentum. The second stage is where you're building the systems based upon lessons learned, things that you know you need to do to be able to get structure around what you're doing. And then the third stage is very much around scaling, having the systems been running, understanding your data, and then focusing on growth and understanding on data and having informed decisions to really focus off direct insights. And I love it as a framework to think about how you build systems. In your experience of those 3 stages, what's your view on at what point you put systems in place and where they become systems for systems' sake versus actually having some benefit on how you run your business and operate?
I think one of the beauties of a startup is that you can be more agile and scrappy at the start, and actually that you can test and you can iterate quickly. And then later, once you've gone through that trial and error period and that ability to be agile and move quickly, to start then building in processes like a phase two has been arguably what I've done. When I think about my current business now, probably try to over engineer certain aspects of it. And because we've got our methodology and we've got certain workshops and ways that we like to do things, that then can quite often slow people down because they need to follow the steps, they need to follow the stages. And it's good for new people coming in because it's easier to train, but you do lose a bit of that kind of startup flair of like people bringing their energy and feeling like they're creating and bringing problem solving and bringing the real energy to that kind of startup challenge. So I can see both sides. I mean, I think in my businesses early on, it would have definitely been kind of scrappy, iterate, much more. Now I'd probably start somewhere between stage 1 and 2 of what you just described. And, I think as you mature as a business, having defined processes is essential. As your team gets bigger and bigger, you need ways of pulling people back to SOPs and having really defined ways of working. The last agency group that I sold my agency into with 1,300 people, 9 offices, different languages, loads of acquisitions going on. We did 8 acquisitions in the time I was on the board as co-CEO. Without structure, we'd have been completely lost at sea. So, but one thing I would say, there was lots of positives there, lots of negatives as well, in the sense that some of that rigidity that comes with those processes makes things really slow and really painful. So actually, from a startup perspective, I always think it's better to stay a little bit more agile and build those processes once you've really figured out the thing.
I would lean on that too. And it's interesting on reflection. At the time, I was all for systems and process. And part of it was my desire to have control and not in a way of micromanagement. But as I grew, if something was being done by somebody else and I wasn't involved at all, I wanted to have a layer of visibility on that. And it's a real maturity piece that comes with being a founder and scaling, of letting go of responsibility, delegating, and letting people own and grow and make their own mistakes and learn. And that, from a culture perspective, is a really big challenge.
It's massive. Look, if you're a founder that is hands-on, and as a founder, you are kind of the center of the whirlwind, right? You're building all that initial energy, and over time, the whirlwind starts to get bigger and you pull people in and they become part of your energy. And it's like, but you need to let them spin off and start having their own energy buckets and different ways of working, because otherwise, if it all sits with you, one, it's not sustainable. And two, you actually end up hindering the growth. So, you look at these huge, well-known CEOs of the world, like Elon Musk, you cannot tell me he's in each of his businesses every day with a finger on every process. He's not. He's got a very clear visionary role. That's what he does. He dips in, probably makes 1 or 2 key decisions a month for each of those businesses, and gets back out of the way and lets people do it, and lead from the front. Obviously, on a much smaller scale, that can be done within startups and scale up businesses as well. Find great people, enable them, trust them, and give them responsibility. And I tend to find that people thrive much better in that type of environment than anything that's too rigid.